"Your father is alive. I know you put him in the asylum," the cleaning lady shouted. Margaret Sullivan felt her heart pound as she held the paper that would change everything. For 6 months, she had worked in the mansion of Harrison Sterling, a cold businessman who never showed any kind of affection. What she found in that drawer made her question everything she knew about that family. That was when she shouted the words that echoed through the luxurious office, pointing her yellow-gloved finger directly at her boss's face. "Your father is alive. I know you put him in the asylum." Harrison froze behind the mahogany desk, his face losing all color. How could that simple cleaning lady know the secret he had kept for so many months? "What are you talking about?" He tried to brush it off, but his trembling voice gave him away. "No use lying, Mr. Harrison. I found the asylum bill. $4,000 every month to keep Mr. Arthur committed. You who were always so kind to me, who asked about my children." The discovery had happened the previous morning during the routine cleaning of the office. Margaret was organizing the papers in the drawer when she saw the document that floored her. The name Arthur Sterling jumped off the page like a slap in the face. "You don't understand anything about our family." Harrison stood up abruptly, trying to regain control of the situation. "My father is sick. He needs special care." "Sick?" Margaret let out a bitter laugh. "Mr. Arthur was perfectly fine when he disappeared. I remember him telling me about the grandchildren he wanted to meet, about his plans to renovate the garden. That's not the behavior of someone with a sick mind." The silence hung heavy in the air like a thick curtain. Harrison knew he had underestimated that simple woman, a little over 40, who supported 2 teenage children on a cleaning lady's salary. Margaret had always been observant. She had grown up in the Bronx suburbs, where learning to read people was a matter of survival. When she started working at the Sterling Mansion, in the upscale neighborhood of the Upper East Side, she immediately noticed the difference between father and son. Arthur was a 72-year-old man, his white hair always neatly combed, who greeted her every morning with a genuine smile. Harrison, 45, thin and always impeccably dressed, barely looked in her direction. "You said he went traveling with distant relatives?" Margaret continued, her voice gaining strength. "But what relatives? Mr. Arthur always told me it was just the 2 of you after Mrs. Eleanor passed away." Harrison began pacing back and forth, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The mention of his mother left him visibly uncomfortable. "My mother was already enough to take care of. I won't let my father go through the same thing." "The same thing what?" Margaret took a step closer. "Mr. Arthur had nothing wrong with him. He took blood pressure medication, wore glasses to read, but he talked normally with me. He asked about my children, about their school. The memories came like an avalanche. Arthur always stopped to chat during breakfast. He asked about Tyler, 16, who wanted to be a mechanic, and about Chloe, 14, who dreamed of being a teacher. He said that one day he would like to meet them. He talked about the grandchildren he never got to see." Margaret felt the emotion rise in her throat. "He said you never let him get close to the kids. Now I understand why." "Enough!" Harrison slammed his fist on the desk. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my house now." "I'm not leaving." Margaret crossed her arms, surprising herself with her own courage. "First you're going to explain to me why you put an innocent man in the asylum." The tension in the air was palpable. The portrait of Arthur on the wall seemed to watch the scene with sad eyes. Margaret noticed that the photo had been turned toward the wall ever since the old man disappeared, but at that moment she could perfectly see the gentleman's kind face. Harrison caught her gaze and felt his stomach churn. He had turned over all of his father's photos, but had forgotten about that one. "My father was losing the ability to make important decisions," he tried to explain, his voice growing less convincing by the second. "The company needed someone who could take charge without hesitating." "What decisions?" Margaret wouldn't let it go. "He seemed perfectly lucid to me. He knew everyone's name in this house, remembered dates, told me stories from the time he built the company. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now, continuing." Margaret's words cut like a knife. Harrison knew she was right, but he couldn't admit it. The truth was far darker than any medical excuse. "You don't understand business." He tried one last card. "There were important contracts, decisions that couldn't wait. Then why didn't you explain it to him? Margaret was determined to get to the bottom of it. Why did you just make him disappear? Mrs. Beverley from next door asks me about Mr. Arthur every single day. He used to send her fruit baskets every Sunday. Harrison hadn't expected a housekeeper to know so many details about his father's life. Every piece of information Margaret revealed was another rope tightening around his neck. The fruit baskets stopped when he went away, he said, but the lie sounded obvious. That's a lie. Margaret shook her head. They stopped exactly on the day Mr. Arthur disappeared. I know because Mrs. Beverley mentioned it to me. She found it very strange. Said that in 20 years he'd never once forgotten to send the fruit. The revelation hit Harrison like a punch. He had completely forgotten about that detail. His father had always been meticulous about small gestures of courtesy toward the neighbors. He also called her, Margaret continued, pressing her advantage. At least he tried. Mrs. Beverley told me the phone rang a few times in the first few months, but when she answered, someone hung up on her. Harrison's face went completely pale. He knew exactly what Margaret was talking about. He had intercepted several of his father's attempts to make contact with the outside world during the first months of his confinement. That doesn't prove anything. He tried to defend himself, but his voice came out weak. It proves Mr. Arthur wasn't traveling at all. Margaret took another step toward the table. And it proves you've been lying to everyone about where he is. The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison let himself fall into the leather chair, the weight of the accusations too much to bear while standing. Margaret watched his reaction and felt a mixture of anger and pity. That man had destroyed his own father's life for reasons she still couldn't fully understand. "Why did you do this to him?" she asked, now in a softer tone. "He loved you so much. He always spoke of you with pride, even when you barely looked him in the face." The words hit Harrison square in the chest. He remembered his father's attempts to get closer, the conversations he always cut short, the advice he systematically ignored. "You don't understand," he muttered. He was getting in the way of everything. Getting in the way of what? The business. The important decisions. Harrison looked up at Margaret. "My father still thought he was in charge, but the world had changed. His methods are outdated, too conservative." Margaret realized she was beginning to pull the truth out of him. She decided to push harder. What kind of decisions was he getting in the way of? Harrison hesitated. He knew he was stepping onto dangerous ground, but the psychological pressure was becoming too much. The company was going through hard times. There were investment opportunities that he refused to consider. He said they were too risky. And were they? That doesn't matter now. Harrison stood up again. "The important thing is that someone needed to make the necessary decisions to save what my grandfather built." Margaret began putting the pieces of the puzzle together. The company was in crisis. Harrison wanted to make risky investments, and Arthur was in the way. "So you decided to get rid of him?" "It wasn't like that." Harrison defended himself. "I sought medical help. The doctors confirmed that he was starting to show signs of mental deterioration." "What doctors?" Margaret didn't believe the explanation. Mr. Arthur hadn't been to a doctor in months. "I know because I always helped him remember his appointments." Another lie unraveled. Harrison began to feel like a cornered animal. "They were private consultations. You didn't need to know." "Oh, so you took him in secret?" Margaret was outraged. "What kind of son does that?" The question echoed through the office like a courtroom accusation. Harrison found himself forced to confront the reality of his actions for the first time in months. "I did what was necessary," he said, but the conviction had vanished from his voice. Margaret realized she had broken through his first line of defense. It was time to push harder. "Where exactly is he?" "That's none of your business." "Yes, it is." Margaret showed the paper she was still holding. "It says here, Havenwood Manor." "I looked it up in the phone book while I was cleaning. It's a private asylum, expensive, $4,000 a month." Harrison could no longer hide his shock. How had a cleaning lady managed to gather so much information in such a short time? "You had no right to go through my personal papers." And you had no right to hide your father in an asylum, Margaret shot back. But apparently we both did things we shouldn't have. The comparison deeply irritated Harrison. He couldn't accept being placed on the same level as a household employee. There's a huge difference between inappropriate curiosity and difficult family decisions. Family decisions? Margaret let out a humorless laugh. You didn't make any family decision. You committed an injustice. An injustice? Harrison stood up abruptly. I saved my family from ruin. My father was making decisions that would have driven us to bankruptcy. Finally, the truth was starting to come out. Margaret gripped the edge of the table, feeling she was about to uncover something even worse. What decisions? Harrison realized he had said too much. He tried to backpedal, but it was too late. It doesn't matter. The important thing is that the company is stable again now. Stable because Mr. Arthur is no longer here to question your wrong decisions. The accusation was direct and struck its mark. Harrison felt as if he'd been slapped in the face. They weren't wrong. They were necessary. Then why hide it? Margaret didn't let up. Why not explain it to him, convince him? Why just make him disappear? The questions piled up like stones being thrown. Harrison felt increasingly suffocated. Because he would never understand. My father was always stubborn, conservative. He would never have approved of the risks we needed to take. What risks? Harrison walked over to the window, looking out at the garden his father had loved so much to tend. The rose bushes were beginning to wither without Arthur's care. The company needed a major investment to modernize, a unique opportunity that couldn't wait. And so? Margaret stepped closer. You could have explained that to him. You really think so? Harrison turned around, his eyes full of frustration. My father still thought we were in the 80s. To him, anything involving technology or modern methods was too dangerous. Margaret began to understand the dynamic between father and son. Two stubborn men, each convinced he was right. But that doesn't justify having him committed to an asylum. It wasn't just that. Harrison returned to the table, picking up a folder. There were other issues. Health issues you didn't know about. What issues? Margaret was immediately skeptical. Mr. Arthur was fine when he disappeared. I talked to him every day. Harrison opened the folder and pulled out some papers. Margaret immediately recognized the doctor's handwriting. Medical reports, he said, placing the documents on the table. They confirm what I'd suspected for months. Margaret leaned in to read, but the handwriting was hard to decipher. She managed to make out a few words. Cognitive decline, memory loss, and inappropriate behavior. These papers could say anything, she said, suspicious. But I spent time with Mr. Arthur every day. He remembered my name, my children's names. He told me detailed stories about the past. You're not a doctor. Harrison tried to use a condescending tone. You can't properly assess a person's mental state. And you can? Margaret shot back. You barely talked to him. How could you know whether he was well or not? The question hit Harrison square in the chest. It was true that he'd avoided long conversations with his father for years. The doctors evaluated him based on scientific tests, not personal impressions. What tests? Margaret wouldn't let it go. When were they done? Where? Harrison hesitated. The truth was that the tests had been done hastily during appointments his father didn't even know were evaluations for commitment. They were done during routine checkups. My father didn't need to know they were special evaluations. So you deceived him? Margaret was growing more indignant by the minute. You took him to the doctor, lying about the reason? It was for his own good. Harrison tried to justify himself. If he'd known, he would have gotten anxious, and it could have affected the results. Or he could have defended himself. Margaret finished the thought. He could have explained to the doctor that he was fine, that he didn't need to be committed. The silence that followed was telling. Harrison had been caught in yet another contradiction. The doctors know what they're doing, he muttered without much conviction. What doctors? Margaret crossed her arms. I want the names. I want to know where it was done. I want to understand how a lucid man suddenly becomes crazy. You're crossing every line. Harrison tried to reclaim his authority. I don't have to answer to a housekeeper about medical decisions, a housekeeper who knew Mr. Arthur better than his own son did. Margaret didn't back down. A housekeeper who noticed when he disappeared, when the photos vanished, when the fruit baskets stopped being sent. Each observation Margaret made was like a knife to Harrison's conscience. He had completely underestimated her ability to notice details. You're very observant for a... He stopped before finishing the offensive remark. For a poor cleaning lady? Margaret finished it for him. That's right, Mr. Harrison. We simple people have to be observant to survive. We have to pay attention to everything, because our lives depend on it. Margaret's words brought a social dimension to the conflict that Harrison hadn't expected. She wasn't just a nosy housekeeper. She was a person with intelligence and sensitivity whom he had completely ignored. I didn't mean it that way. Yes, you did. Margaret didn't let it slide. But what you don't understand is that precisely because I'm observant, I know there was nothing wrong with Mr. Arthur's mind. Harrison sat back down, feeling the weight of the situation. He was being confronted by a woman who had spent more time with his father in the last few months than he had himself. Maybe you're right about some things, he admitted, for the first time showing a hint of vulnerability. But the situation was more complicated than you imagine. Then explain it to me. Margaret pulled out a chair and sat down, showing she was willing to listen. Tell me why you thought there was no other way out. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Harrison looked at Margaret in surprise. He hadn't expected her to be able to shift her stance so quickly, moving from confrontation to an attempt at dialogue. It's not simple, he began, his voice lower. The company my grandfather built, that my father developed, was on the verge of bankruptcy. Why? Competition, technology, market changes that neither my father nor I could properly predict. Harrison ran a hand through his hair. An opportunity came up to partner with an international group, but it required drastic changes to the company's structure. Margaret listened attentively, trying to understand the other side of the story. And Mr. Arthur didn't agree? He saw it as a betrayal of the family's principles. Harrison sighed. To him, accepting foreign partners was like selling the company's soul. And maybe he was right. Maybe. But then again, maybe not. Harrison stood up and walked over to the bookshelf, picking up a thick folder. These are the numbers from the last 2 years. Constant losses, employees being laid off, contracts being lost to more modern competitors. Margaret looked at the papers without fully understanding, but she could make out the red numbers that repeated month after month. So, the company really was doing badly. It was on the edge of the abyss, Harrison confirmed. The agreement with the foreign group was our last real chance at survival. But Mr. Arthur didn't see it that way. He thought we could recover on our own, with patience and hard work. Harrison sat back down. Methods that worked 30 years ago, but that no longer apply to today's market. Margaret was beginning to understand the complexity of the situation. It wasn't just a matter of greed or cruelty, but a genuine conflict over the future of the family business. And you two couldn't talk about it? We tried several times, Harrison admitted, but it always ended in an argument. My father accused me of wanting to destroy the family legacy, and I accused him of being stubborn and old-fashioned. So you stopped talking to each other. Practically. Harrison looked at his hands. The last few months before the commitment were terrible. He questioned every decision I made, every meeting, every contract. It got to the point where he started undermining my decisions in front of the employees. Margaret was beginning to see a more complex picture, but she still couldn't justify the forced commitment. Even so, putting him in an asylum... It wasn't my first choice, Harrison interrupted her. I considered several alternatives. Retirement, splitting the company, even selling everything and each going our own way. And why didn't you do that? Because my father would never have accepted retiring voluntarily. The company was his life, and splitting it, Harrison shook his head. He would never have agreed to give me real autonomy to make the necessary changes. Margaret was starting to understand Harrison's mindset, but she still couldn't accept the methods he had chosen. So you decided to resolve it by force. It wasn't by force, Harrison defended himself. I sought professional help. I spoke with doctors, lawyers, psychologists. They all told me that, given his age and the stress of the situation, a temporary commitment could be beneficial. Temporary, Margaret latched onto the word. It's been 6 months. The idea was for him to stay a few months until I could stabilize the company's situation. Then we would talk calmly, once tempers had cooled down. Margaret noticed there was something that wasn't being said. And how's the company doing now? Harrison hesitated before answering. Better. Much better. The deal went through, the investments are paying off, we managed to keep all our employees. Then why is Mr. Arthur still hospitalized? The question Margaret didn't want to ask finally came out. Harrison realized he had reached the hardest part of the conversation. Because... He started, then stopped. Because now I'm afraid of how he'll react when he finds out everything that was done. Finally, the truth had been spoken. Harrison wasn't keeping his father hospitalized out of medical necessity, but out of fear of the consequences of his own actions. You're afraid of him. I'm afraid of his reaction, Harrison corrected. When he finds out I signed contracts in his name, that I used powers of attorney he didn't consciously authorize, that I changed the company's bylaws. Margaret felt her stomach churn. The situation was even worse than she had imagined. You forged documents? I didn't forge anything. Harrison defended himself quickly. I used legal authority I had, but maybe in ways he wouldn't approve of. There's a name for that, Mr. Harrison. It's called fraud. It's not fraud when you're saving the family business. He tried to justify himself. Everything I did was with the best intentions for all of us. For everyone, or for you? The direct question left Harrison speechless for a few seconds. At first I thought it was for everyone. Now, he paused. Now I'm not so sure anymore. Margaret realized she had found a crack in Harrison's emotional armor. He was starting to question his own actions. Mr. Arthur trusts you. Trusted, Harrison corrected. After finding all this out, I doubt he'll ever trust me again. He might understand, if you explain it properly. You really think so? Harrison looked at Margaret with an expression of desperation she had never seen before. You think he can forgive what I did? Margaret stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the neglected garden. I don't know, but I know he has the right to try. Silence settled over the office. Harrison watched Margaret as she watched the garden his father had loved so much. The roses are dying, she commented. I don't know anything about plants, Harrison admitted. My father was the one who took care of all of this. He would be very sad to see the state of the garden. He'd be sad to see the state of a lot of things. Harrison sighed deeply. Margaret turned to face him. Then maybe it's time to let him see. I can't. Harrison shook his head. Not after everything that's happened. Yes, you can. Margaret approached the desk again. You can go there today and bring him home. What if he doesn't want to forgive me? That's a decision for him to make, not you. Harrison was silent for several minutes, processing Margaret's words. She waited patiently, realizing he was fighting an internal battle. You don't understand, he finally said. It's not just about forgiveness. There are legal issues involved. If he wants to sue me. Did you think about that when you decided to have him committed? At the time, I thought it would be temporary, that we'd find a solution before it ever came to that. Margaret realized Harrison had gotten tangled up in his own lies and now couldn't see a way out. What's the worst thing that could happen if you tell him the truth? He could disinherit me. He could sue me. He could take back control of the company and undo every deal I made. And what if that happens? The company could go under. Hundreds of people could lose their jobs. Everything our family built could disappear. Margaret reflected on his words. It was a complex situation with no easy answers. But what if it doesn't? And what if he realizes you were trying to save the company? It's too great a risk. Greater than keeping an innocent man locked up in an insane asylum? Margaret wouldn't let it go. Greater than living with that guilt for the rest of your life? Harrison got up and went over to his father's portrait, turning it to face the room again. Arthur's gentle face seemed to silently disapprove of his son's actions. "He looks older in this photo," he commented. "He's older now, too," Margaret said softly. 6 months away from home, away from his family, not understanding why he's there. That ages anyone. Margaret's words hit Harrison like a knife to the heart. He hadn't thought about the emotional suffering his father was going through. "Do you think he's suffering? Would you if you were in his place?" It was a rhetorical question, but Harrison considered it seriously. The idea of being locked up against his will, without understanding why, terrified him. "I need to think," he finally said. "About what?" Margaret wouldn't let him dodge it. "What is there to think about? Mr. Arthur is suffering needlessly while you sit here tormenting yourself with guilt. It's not as simple as you're making it seem." "Yes, it is." Margaret was blunt. "You did something wrong. Now you need to set it right. The longer you wait, the worse it'll get." Harrison walked over to the leather armchair that was his father's favorite and let himself sink into it. "And what if he doesn't want to forgive me even after I explain everything? Then at least you'll have tried to do the right thing." Margaret sat on the edge of the desk. "And at least he'll have the chance to decide for himself." "You have children," Harrison said suddenly. "Imagine if one of them did something like that to you." Margaret thought about her teenage children and tried to picture herself in that situation. "I would be deeply hurt. Deeply. But I think I'd be even more hurt if I found out they'd kept lying when they had the chance to tell the truth." Margaret's answer was simple, but profound. Harrison realized she had touched on the heart of the matter. "So you think I should go there today?" "I think you should have gone a long time ago." Harrison got up from the armchair and went to the desk, picking up his car keys. "Do you want to come with me?" Margaret was surprised by the invitation. "Why?" "Because you know my father better than I do these days," Harrison admitted with difficulty. "And because I think he'd be happy to see a friendly face." Margaret hesitated for a moment, thinking about her children who would be coming home from school in a few hours. "All right, but afterward you'll take me home so I can explain everything to my children." "Explain what?" "That maybe I won't have a job tomorrow," Margaret said with a sad half-smile. "Why wouldn't you have a job?" "Because I confronted my boss, accused him of committing crimes, and now I'm forcing him to do something he doesn't want to do." Harrison looked at Margaret with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Do you really think I'd fire you after all this? I don't know what to expect." "Margaret," he said, using her name for the first time since she'd started working at the house. "If my father forgives me, it'll be largely thanks to you. If he doesn't forgive me, at least I'll know I tried to do the right thing, also thanks to you." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't expected such direct acknowledgement from Harrison. "You don't need to thank me. I did what I thought was right." And that's what made all the difference. They left the office in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Margaret grabbed her purse and took off her apron, putting on the simple coat she'd brought from home. In the car, on the drive to the insane asylum, Harrison broke the silence. "How did you find out about Havenwood Manor?" "I looked it up online," Margaret replied. "When I saw the name on the bill, I wanted to know what kind of place it was." "And what did you think?" "An expensive, discreet place, where wealthy families put relatives who've become inconvenient." The blunt description made Harrison shrink back in the driver's seat. "You see me as a monster, don't you?" Margaret thought carefully before answering. "I see you as a desperate man who made wrong choices. That doesn't make you a monster, but it also doesn't justify what you did. Thank you for your honesty." "You're welcome." They drove in silence through the streets of New York City, leaving downtown toward Westchester, where Havenwood Manor was located. Margaret watched the urban landscape and thought about how life could change so drastically in a matter of hours. That morning, she was just a cleaning lady doing her job. Now, she was in a luxury car next to her boss, going to pick up a man who had been unjustly committed. "Can I ask you something?" Harrison said when they stopped in traffic. Go ahead. Why didn't you take what you found straight to the police? Why did you decide to confront me first? Margaret reflected on the question. She herself wasn't sure of the full answer. I think because I always respected Mr. Arthur, she said finally, and he always spoke of you with love, despite everything. I thought maybe there was an explanation, a way to resolve this without destroying everything. You're a better person than I deserve. That's not it. It's just that I understand what a complicated family is like. Margaret looked out the window. My children and I have our problems too. I know how hard it can be to understand each other sometimes. Harrison absorbed Margaret's words, realizing there were layers of wisdom in that simple woman he had never noticed before. Do you think he'll want to come home with me? There's only one way to find out. Havenwood Manor was a discreet building, painted beige, with well-kept gardens and a facade that looked more like a hotel than a psychiatric hospital. Margaret observed the place carefully, trying to imagine how Arthur had felt when he first arrived there. Harrison parked the car and sat still for a few minutes, his hands still on the steering wheel. I'm scared, he admitted. That's normal, Margaret said, but fear can't be greater than the love you have for him. What if I don't have enough love? Then you'll find that out now and you can work on it from here on. Harrison nodded and got out of the car. Margaret followed him to the reception desk, where a middle-aged woman greeted them with a professional smile. Good afternoon. We'd like to visit Arthur Sterling, Harrison said, his voice trembling slightly. Of course, Mr. Sterling. He's in the inner garden. May I accompany you? During the walk through the hallways, Margaret noticed the place was really quite pleasant. Nothing like the haunted asylums from the movies, but that in a way made the situation even more disturbing. A beautiful place being used for a horrible purpose. How is he? Harrison asked the receptionist. Physically well. Emotionally, she hesitated. He keeps questioning the reason for his commitment. He constantly asks when he can go home. The words were like knives in Harrison's heart. Margaret noticed the impact they had on him. Does he get many visitors? Actually, you're his first visitor since he arrived. Harrison stopped in the middle of the hallway, his face going pale. No visits in 6 months. The medical guidelines were that visits could agitate the patient during the adjustment period. Margaret felt deep anger rising in her throat. Arthur had spent 6 months completely isolated from any family contact. And those medical guidelines came from whom? The receptionist checked a file. From Dr. Philip Vance, the doctor in charge of the case. He was the one who recommended the temporary isolation. Harrison knew exactly who Dr. Vance was, a private psychiatrist he had specifically hired to provide scientific support for the commitment. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, go ahead and leave a like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. They arrived at the inner garden, where several elderly patients were scattered across chairs and benches. Margaret searched with her eyes until she found Arthur sitting alone under a tree, staring blankly at a book he didn't seem to be actually reading. The man she saw there was a diminished version of the Arthur she had known. His hair, once always neatly combed, was messy. His face, which once radiated energy, now looked tired and sad. But his eyes were still the same, intelligent and clear-minded. Mr. Arthur, Margaret called softly. The old man looked up from his book and needed a few seconds to focus on her. When he recognized her face, a mixture of joy and confusion took over his features. Margaret, he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. Are you real or am I dreaming? I'm real, Mr. Arthur. Margaret approached and took his hand. I came to see how you're doing. Arthur clasped her hand as if holding on to keep from drowning. Where am I, Margaret? No one here explains things properly to me. They say I'm sick, but I don't feel sick. I just want to go home. Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. It was obvious that Arthur was perfectly lucid and aware. You're at Havenwood Manor, Mr. Arthur. It's a special hospital. Hospital? Arthur seemed genuinely confused. But I wasn't sick when I came here. I remember Harrison said we were going to visit a doctor friend of his, but when I got here, they told me I had to stay." Margaret looked at Harrison, who had remained a few feet back, clearly struggling with his emotions. "Harrison is here too, Mr. Arthur." "My son?" Arthur's eyes lit up. "Did he come to take me home?" "Let's talk about that," Margaret said softly. "But first, how are you feeling?" "Confused, very confused," Arthur admitted. "Arthur, they give me medication that makes me drowsy, but I don't understand why I need to take it. When I ask, they say it's for my own good." Margaret turned to look at Harrison, who had finally approached. "Dad," he said, his voice almost inaudible. Arthur looked at his son with an expression of hope and hurt mixed together. "Harrison, why did it take you so long to come see me? I tried calling you several times in the beginning, but I could never get through to you." Harrison started and stopped, unable to find the words. "Mr. Arthur," Margaret interceded gently. "Harrison has some things he needs to explain to you. Important things about why you're here." "You know why I'm here?" Arthur asked, clinging to any hope of understanding his situation. "I do, and I think it's time for Harrison to explain everything to you." Arthur looked from his son to Margaret and back to his son. "So, I'm not sick?" "No, Dad." Harrison finally managed to speak. "You're not sick? Then why am I here?" Harrison knelt beside his father's chair, the tears finally coming. "Because I made the biggest mistake of my life. Because I was selfish, a coward, and made decisions I had no right to make." Arthur looked at his son with an expression of utter confusion. "I don't understand, son." "The company was going under, Dad," Harrison began, deciding to tell everything at once. "We were on the brink of bankruptcy, and I saw an opportunity to save it all, but I knew you wouldn't agree." "What opportunity?" "A deal with foreign investors. They offered a partnership proposal that would save the company, but it required changes that I knew you would reject." Arthur processed the information slowly. "And then?" "Then Harrison hesitated, but under Margaret's encouraging gaze, he continued. "Then I decided it would be easier if you weren't there to question my decisions." "What do you mean, weren't there?" "I fabricated false medical reports. I said you were losing your mental faculties. I used that to justify your institutionalization and to obtain power of attorney to act on your behalf." The silence that followed was deafening. Arthur looked at his son as if seeing a stranger. "You put me here on purpose?" The old man's voice came out as a whisper. "Yes," Harrison admitted, unable to look his father in the eye. "You lied about my mental health to push me away from the company?" "Yes." "You forged documents?" "I used legal powers in an inappropriate manner." Arthur leaned back in his chair, the impact of the revelation visible on his face. 6 months, he murmured. 6 months thinking I was losing my mind, that maybe I really had some illness I couldn't perceive. Margaret felt her heart break. The pain in Arthur's voice was palpable. "Mr. Arthur," she said softly, "Harrison came here to tell you the truth and to take you home." "Home?" Arthur looked at his son. "Why? Business is already settled, isn't it? You already managed to do everything you wanted without my interference." "Dad, please," Harrison pleaded. "I know I made a terrible mistake, but I did it thinking I was saving our family." "Our family?" Arthur let out a bitter laugh. "What family, Harrison? A family is built on trust, on mutual respect. What you did was treat me like an obstacle to be removed." "You're right," Harrison admitted. "There's no justification for what I did, but I'm here now, willing to face the consequences, willing to try to fix whatever can be fixed." Arthur remained silent for several minutes, processing everything he had heard. Margaret respected the silence, understanding that the old man needed time to absorb the magnitude of the betrayal. "Is the company really saved?" he asked finally. "It is. The investments worked out. The employees still have their jobs. We have contracts for the next 5 years. And you did all of that using my name without my authorization." "Yes." Harrison lowered his head. "I used powers of attorney I obtained through the claim of mental incapacity. Technically, that's a crime. I know." Arthur looked at Margaret. "And how did you find out about all of this?" I found a bill from the asylum in Harrison's desk drawer. She explained, I found it strange that you had suddenly disappeared, so I started investigating. You investigated on your own? Yes. I couldn't accept that you had simply vanished without a trace. Arthur smiled for the first time since the conversation had begun. I always knew you were special, Margaret. I always knew you paid attention to the details others ignored. You treated me with respect, Margaret said. You made me feel like I mattered. I couldn't let it go when I realized something was wrong. Arthur reached out and touched Margaret's arm. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me. You don't have to thank me. Arthur turned back to Harrison. And now? What do you expect to happen? I hope you can forgive me, but I understand if you can't, Harrison said. What matters is that you come home, that you take back control of your life. And what if I want to undo every deal you made? Harrison took a deep breath before answering. That's your right. The company is yours. The decisions should be yours. Even knowing that could mean bankruptcy. Even so, Harrison confirmed. I'd rather see the company go under than keep you here unjustly for one more day. Arthur studied his son's face for a long time. Are you serious? Completely. So you did learn something in these 6 months. I learned that some things are more important than money, Harrison said. I learned that without family, without trust, having success in business means nothing. Arthur nodded slowly. And how is my garden? The question caught Harrison off guard. Bad, he admitted. The plants are dying. I don't know how to take care of them. And Mrs. Beverly. Is she still receiving the fruit baskets? No. Harrison felt ashamed. I completely forgot about the baskets. And the long-time employees? How are they handling the changes? Some have adapted well, others... Harrison hesitated. Others have missed you. They ask about you constantly. Arthur absorbed the information. You realize you destroyed much more than our personal relationship, don't you? You destroyed the trust people had in our family. I realize that, Harrison admitted, and I know it's going to take a long time to rebuild it if I ever can. If I ever let you try, Arthur corrected. If you let me try, Harrison agreed. Margaret watched the dialogue between father and son, noticing that both were being brutally honest with each other for the first time in a long while. May I give my opinion? She asked. Both men looked at her. Of course, Arthur said. I think you two have been suffering for a long time. Harrison suffered making decisions he knew were wrong, and Mr. Arthur suffered being punished for something he didn't do. She paused. Maybe it's time to stop suffering and start building something new. What do you mean? Harrison asked. Mr. Harrison saved the company, that's a fact. He did it the wrong way, but he saved it. Mr. Arthur has the wisdom and experience to grow the company ethically. Margaret looked at both of them. On your own, you have limitations. Together, you can build something much better. Arthur reflected on Margaret's words. Are you suggesting we work together after all this? I'm suggesting you talk, really talk, without ego, without wounded pride, just two men who love the same company and want what's best for it. And what if we find out we're incompatible working together? Then you find another solution, Margaret said simply, but at least you try. Harrison looked at his father with hope in his eyes. What do you think, Dad? Arthur was silent for a long time. Finally, he got up from his chair. I think first I want to get out of this place. Then we can talk about the rest. Does that mean you're willing to come home with me? It means I'm willing to consider that maybe my son has learned something from his mistakes. Arthur looked directly into Harrison's eyes. But it will be a long process. Trust isn't rebuilt overnight. I understand. Harrison nodded. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. We'll see. Arthur turned to Margaret. And you? Are you going to keep working for our dysfunctional family? Margaret smiled. If you want me to, yes. Someone needs to keep the two of you in line. For the first time in months, Arthur let out a genuine laugh. It seems you'll be our moral supervisor. Someone has to be, Margaret replied with a smile. Harrison approached his father. Can we go home now? We can, Arthur confirmed. But first I need to say goodbye to some people here. I made friends over the last few months. They spent the next hour handling the discharge procedures. Dr. Philip Vance tried to question the decision, claiming Arthur wasn't fully stable yet, but Harrison was firm in overriding any medical objections. "You're losing a paying patient," Margaret said to the doctor when he insisted on his objections. "Maybe you should worry more about ethics and less about revenue." Dr. Vance looked at her with disdain, but said nothing. During the trip back home, Arthur observed the city through the car window, as if seeing it for the first time. "A lot has changed," he commented. "Not that much," Harrison said. "Maybe you're just seeing it with different eyes." "Maybe," Arthur agreed. 6 months isolated make you rethink many things." "And what did you rethink?" Arthur looked at his son through the rearview mirror. "That maybe I was too stubborn. That maybe I should have listened to your ideas more, even when I disagreed with them. And I should have been more patient," Harrison admitted. "I should have found ways to convince you, instead of just pushing you away." Margaret, sitting in the back seat next to Arthur, watched the attempt at reconciliation between father and son. "You have plenty of time ahead to work these things out," she said. "The important thing is that you're both willing to try." When they arrived at the mansion, Arthur stopped at the entrance, observing the facade of the house where he had lived for so many years. "It looks different," he said. "What looks different?" Harrison asked. "I don't know. Smaller, maybe. Or maybe it's me seeing it from another perspective." They walked in together, and the first thing Arthur did was go to the office window to look at the garden. "It really is a mess," he commented, but without anger in his voice. "I can learn to take care of it," Harrison offered. "If you teach me." "That could be a good start," Arthur smiled. "Taking care of plants teaches patience, something we both need to learn." Margaret watched the scene with satisfaction. She knew there was still much to be resolved between father and son, but at least now they were willing to try. "Mr. Arthur," she said, "I need to go home to see my children. They must be worried." "Of course." Arthur approached her. "Margaret, I don't know how to thank you for what you did." "You don't need to thank me. I did what any decent person would do." "No," Arthur shook his head. "Any decent person would have gone straight to the police. You gave our family a chance to sort things out first. That was much more than decency, it was wisdom." Harrison approached. "Margaret, I want you to know that from today on, you're no longer just our housekeeper. You're—" He paused, searching for the right words. "You're part of the family." "What do you mean?" "I want you to be our household manager," Harrison explained. "Better salary, more flexible hours, and most importantly, I want you to keep us in line when needed." Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. "I accept," she said, "but only if you promise me one thing." "What?" "That you'll really talk to each other. No yelling, no fighting, just honest conversations about the future of the company and the family." Father and son looked at each other. "I promise," Arthur said. "I promise too," Harrison agreed. "Then it's settled," Margaret smiled. "Now I really do need to go home." Harrison grabbed the car keys. "I'll drive you home. It's the least I can do." During the drive to Margaret's house in Queens, they talked about the next steps. "Are you going to want to go back to work right away?" Harrison asked. "No," Arthur replied. "First, I want to understand everything that's been done over the last few months. I want to see the contracts, meet the new partners, assess the changes. And then? Then we'll decide together what's the best way to run the company going forward." Harrison felt relieved. His father was willing to at least consider keeping the agreements that had been made. "And what if you don't agree with some of the decisions?" "Then we'll talk. As father and son, as partners, as people who want what's best for the company." Arthur looked at Margaret. "With mediation from our new manager, if necessary." Margaret laughed. "I hope it won't be necessary. But if it is, I'm here." When they arrived at the housing complex where Margaret lived, she hesitated before getting out of the car. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." The two men answered at the same time. "What did you learn from all of this?" Arthur was the first to answer. "I learned that pride can make us lose the most important things in life, and that sometimes the simplest people have the wisdom we need most." Harrison reflected before speaking. I learned that the ends don't justify the means, and that trust is more valuable than any business deal. He paused. And I learned that underestimating people because of their social standing is not just wrong, but foolish. Margaret nodded, satisfied with the answers. Then my work here is done. For today. She smiled. See you tomorrow. She got out of the car and waved as father and son drove away. She climbed the stairs to the small but cozy apartment where she lived with her children. Tyler and Chloe were doing homework at the kitchen table when she arrived. "Mom, why are you so late?" Chloe asked. "And why do you look like you've been through a roller coaster?" Tyler added. Margaret sat down at the table with her children. "Because I really have been through a roller coaster," she said, "and because sometimes doing the right thing is more complicated than it seems." "Did something happen at work?" Tyler asked, worried. "How something did, but it all worked out." Margaret smiled. "And starting tomorrow, things are going to be different for our family." "Different how?" "Better different. Much better." She told the children an adapted version of what had happened, emphasizing the importance of always doing what's right even when it's hard. "You did the right thing, Mom," Chloe said when she finished. "Mr. Arthur seemed like a good person in the few moments I saw him." "And Harrison?" Tyler asked. "Did he really change, or is he just feeling guilty?" "That's a good question," Margaret admitted. "I think we'll find out in time. But at least now he has a chance to prove he can be a better person." That night, while the children slept, Margaret lay awake thinking about the day's events. She had risked everything, her job, her family's financial stability, to do what she believed was right. But she didn't regret it. She knew she would have to live with herself if she had done nothing, and that was a prospect she couldn't accept. On the other side of the city, in the mansion on the Upper East Side, father and son were also awake. Arthur was in the garden, even in the dark, checking on the condition of the plants he loved so much. Harrison found him there an hour after midnight. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "6 months sleeping in a bed that isn't mine," Arthur replied. "It'll take a while to get used to being home again." "Dad," Harrison approached, "I know it'll take a long time to rebuild our relationship, but I want you to know I'm sorry. Truly." "I know that," Arthur said. "I can see it in your eyes, but regret is only the first step. What matters is what you do from here on." "And what if I make other mistakes?" "You will," Arthur said pragmatically. "We all do. The difference is whether you'll have the courage to admit when you're wrong and try to fix it." Harrison nodded. "And what if we find out we can't work together? Then we'll find other solutions." Arthur turned to look at his son. "But we won't give up without truly trying." "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you prove you deserve a second chance." They remained in silence in the garden for a few more minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Margaret is a special person," Arthur commented. "She is," Harrison agreed. "Makes me think of how many other special people I've overlooked in my life. It's never too late to start paying attention." "I hope not." Harrison looked at the wilted plants. "Can I really learn to take care of the garden?" "You can," Arthur smiled. "But you're going to have to be patient. Plants die if you try to rush the growing process." "I'm starting to understand that patience is something I need to learn in several areas of life." "Now you're talking like a mature man." Father and son went back home together, for the first time in years feeling like a real family. In the days that followed, the household routine changed completely. Arthur spent his mornings in the garden, gradually bringing back his favorite plants. The afternoons were dedicated to reviewing the contracts and decisions Harrison had made during his absence. Margaret, now in her new role, organized the meetings between father and son, often serving as mediator when discussions got heated. "You two are talking at each other, not with each other." She would interrupt when she noticed the communication breaking down. The first big decision they had to make together was about continuing the agreement with the foreign investors. "The numbers are good," Arthur admitted after analyzing the reports. "But some of the clauses worry me." "Which clauses?" Harrison asked, genuinely interested in his father's opinion. "This one about supplier exclusivity, and this one about quality control." Arthur pointed at the documents. They're taking too much control over our operational processes. I thought about that at the time, Harrison admitted, but I figured it was an acceptable price to secure the investment. And it might be, Arthur agreed. But I think we can renegotiate some of the terms now that the company is stable. It was the first time father and son truly worked as a team. Harrison provided the financial data and knowledge of new markets. Arthur contributed his negotiation experience and long-term strategic vision. Margaret watched the meetings with satisfaction, seeing how both of them had matured through the traumatic experience they'd been through. 3 weeks after Arthur's return, they received a visit from Mrs. Beverley, the elderly neighbor. "Arthur, dear," she said when he opened the door. "I missed you so much. Where have you been?" Arthur looked at Margaret and Harrison, who were both present at the moment. "I've been traveling," he said, "but now I'm back to stay." "How wonderful." Mrs. Beverley smiled. "And the fruit baskets, are they coming back?" "They are," Arthur assured her, "starting next Sunday." When Mrs. Beverley left, Harrison turned to his father. "You're not going to tell her the truth?" "Why would I?" Arthur asked. "She'd worry, get sad, blame you needlessly. Some truths don't need to be shared with everyone." Margaret was surprised by Arthur's generosity. "You're not angry?" "I feel a lot of things," Arthur admitted. "Anger, sadness, disappointment, but I also feel hope, and I'd rather focus on hope." A month after Arthur's return, the company had its best quarter in 5 years. The combination of the father's experience with the son's modern vision was producing exceptional results. "I think we found our formula," Harrison commented during a results meeting. "We found a formula," Arthur corrected. "We need to keep adjusting, improving, adapting." "True," Harrison agreed. "But at least now we know we can work together." Margaret, who now took part in the company's strategic meetings, smiled watching the evolution of both of them. "Can I make a suggestion?" she asked. "Always," Arthur said. "Maybe it's time to make this partnership official. Make it clear to employees and clients that you're working together again." "What do you mean?" Harrison asked. "A meeting with the whole team. A joint presentation for our key clients. Something that shows the Menezes family is united again." Father and son looked at each other. "That makes sense," Arthur admitted. "People must be confused about the company's situation." "And about my absence," Harrison agreed. "A lot of people must be speculating about what happened." They organized a big meeting the following week. Employees, important clients, and business partners were invited to what was called the Menezes family reunion. During the presentation, Arthur and Harrison spoke about the importance of combining tradition with innovation, experience with boldness, prudence with vision for the future. "We went through a period of internal reorganization," Arthur explained to the audience, "but we came out of this experience stronger and more united." "We learned that our company is not just a business," Harrison added. "It's a family legacy that requires both vision and responsibility." Margaret watched from the back row, proud to see how father and son had found a way to work together while respecting their differences. After the meeting, several long-time employees approached Arthur. "Mr. Arthur, we missed you so much," said Deborah, the secretary who had worked at the company for 15 years. "The company wasn't the same without you." "Thank you, Deborah," Arthur smiled. "But I think you all did just fine without me, and Harrison proved he's a capable leader." "That's true," Deborah agreed. "But now that you're working together, we can see the company has the best of both worlds." That evening back home, the three of them sat in the garden, now restored and blooming once again, to talk about the day's events. "I think it worked," Harrison said. "People seem relieved to know we're working together." "It worked because it's genuine," Arthur replied. "If it were just an act, everyone would have noticed." Margaret watched the plants Arthur had saved and the new seedlings Harrison was learning to care for. "You know what makes me happiest about all this?" she said. "What?" they both asked. "Seeing that you didn't just reconcile, but you truly became partners. It's no longer a father trying to teach a stubborn son, or a son trying to modernize a conservative father. It's two respectful men working together." "You're right," Arthur admitted. "And a lot of that happened because someone had the courage to force us to face the truth." I only did what I thought was right, Margaret said. The hard work of forgiving each other and learning to work together was done by you. No, Harrison disagreed. Without you, I never would have had the courage to tell my father the truth. I would have kept him institutionalized to this day, convincing myself it was for his own good. And I would have been wasting away in that place, dying a little more each day, Arthur added. Margaret, you saved our family. Margaret felt her eyes fill with tears. I didn't save anything. I just reminded you that family is the most important thing there is. 2 months after Arthur's return, Margaret received a surprise. Harrison and Arthur called her to a special meeting at the office. Margaret, Harrison began, we want to make you an offer. What kind of offer? We want you to be our minority partner in the company, Arthur explained. 5% of the partnership, with rights to profit sharing and a voice in strategic decisions. Margaret was speechless for a few seconds. But why? Because you proved you have the kind of integrity and good judgment our company needs, Harrison said. And because we want to make sure there will always be someone to keep us honest. Besides, Arthur added, your children deserve better opportunities. Tyler can study to be a mechanical engineer if he wants. Chloe can pursue a degree in education. With the profit sharing, you'll be able to give them the future they deserve. Margaret stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the blooming garden where it all had begun. That's very generous, too generous. It's not generosity, Harrison said. It's recognition. And it's an investment. We want you to be part of our business family officially. Margaret turned to face them. And what if I make mistakes? What if I can't live up to it? We all make mistakes, Arthur said with a smile. What matters is that you have something many people don't. The courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. And the emotional intelligence to understand people, Harrison added. Something both my father and I need to learn better. Margaret walked back toward the table. I accept, she said, but with one condition. Which is, if I ever think you're making wrong decisions, I'll speak up, even if it's uncomfortable for everyone. We hope you will, Arthur smiled. That's exactly why we want you as a partner. Then it's settled. They embraced, sealing a partnership born from adversity that had grown into something much greater. 6 months later, Tyler earned a scholarship to study mechanical engineering. Chloe was excelling in school and dreaming of studying education. Sterling Enterprises had doubled its profits and become a benchmark in its industry for combining tradition with innovation. Arthur, now 73, divided his time between the garden he loved so much and the strategy meetings where his experience was valued. Harrison, at 46, had learned that true leadership doesn't come from authority, but from respect and trust. And Margaret, who had started it all as a simple, observant cleaning lady, was now the partner who balanced the company with her practical wisdom and human sensitivity. One afternoon, as the three of them reviewed the company's expansion plans for the coming year, Margaret made an observation. You know what I find most interesting about this whole story? What? Harrison asked. That in the end, we all got what we needed most, not what we thought we wanted. What do you mean? Arthur asked. Harrison wanted to save the company, and he did, but in a way he never imagined. Mr. Arthur wanted to protect the family legacy, and he achieved it, but by learning to embrace change. And I just wanted a steady job to take care of my children. And you got much more than that, Harrison noted. That's true. But the most important thing is that we all learned that sometimes the path to getting what we want goes through doing what's right, not what's easy. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. You're right. If each of us had taken the easy path, me giving in without questioning, Harrison keeping secrets, you ignoring what you discovered, no one would have gotten what truly mattered. Which was what? Harrison asked. A real family, Margaret answered. Built on respect, trust, and genuine love. That night, Margaret went home with a heart full of gratitude, not just for the financial transformation of her family, but for the profound lesson she had learned about the importance of doing what's right, even when the world seems to be against you. Tyler was studying for a math test when she arrived. How was your day, Mom? Another day learning that life always surprises us, she answered, kissing her son's forehead. In a good way or a bad way? Definitely in a good way. Chloe appeared in the kitchen. Mom, the teacher asked us to write an essay about courage. Can I write about you? Margaret felt her heart warm. Why about me? Because you taught me that courage isn't not being afraid. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid. Yes, you can write about me, Margaret smiled. But remember to mention that courage is something we all have. We just need to find it when necessary. That night, while the children slept, Margaret sat at the kitchen table and wrote a letter she would never send. A letter to herself, to the woman she had been 6 months earlier. Dear Margaret of the past, I know you're afraid. Afraid of losing your job. Afraid of not being able to support the boys. Afraid of getting involved in problems that are bigger than you. But I want you to know that fighting for what is right is worth it. It's worth risking your security when someone is being wronged. It's worth believing that people can change when they're given the opportunity. You're going to discover that you're stronger than you imagine. That your ability to notice details is a gift. That your compassion is a strength, not a weakness. And you'll discover that when you do what is right, the universe conspires to help you. Not always the way you expect, but always the way you need. Keep being observant. Keep caring about people. Keep having the courage to act when your conscience demands it. Your life is about to change in ways you never imagined, and it all begins with the decision not to ignore an injustice. With love and admiration, the Margaret of the future. She folded the letter and put it away in the drawer, a reminder to herself that sometimes the greatest miracles are born from the smallest acts of courage. Across town at the mansion in the Upper East Side, Arthur was in the garden doing his nightly walk among the plants he had rescued. Harrison found him there, as had become customary over the past few months. "Can't sleep again?" Harrison asked. "I can," Arthur smiled, "but I like coming here to give thanks." Thanks to whom? To life, to fate, to a courageous housekeeper who didn't let an innocent man wither away in an asylum. Arthur gently touched a rose he had recently planted. "Sometimes I think I'll never be able to properly repay what Margaret did for us. I think the best way to repay her is to keep being the person she saw in us," Harrison said. "The person she thought was worth saving." "You're right," Arthur nodded. "And you know what else? I think she didn't just save me. She saved you too." "What do you mean?" "You were becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of committing his own father to an institution to get what he wanted." Arthur looked at his son. "But when she confronted you, you found your humanity again. I was lucky she gave me a chance to make things right instead of simply turning me over to the authorities. It wasn't luck, it was wisdom. She realized you weren't a criminal. You were a desperate man making wrong decisions." Arthur placed his hand on his son's shoulder, and she was right. Father and son stood in silence for a few minutes, watching the stars above the reclaimed garden. "Dad," Harrison said finally, "thank you for forgiving me." "Thank you for giving me a reason to forgive," Arthur replied, "and for learning from your mistakes instead of simply repeating them." "Do you think our story can inspire other people?" "I think every story of forgiveness and new beginnings can inspire someone," Arthur reflected. "But the most important thing isn't inspiring others. It's continuing to inspire each other to be better people." "And do you think we're managing?" Harrison asked. "To be better people?" "We're trying," Arthur smiled. "And as long as we're trying, there's hope." They walked back home together, father and son, partners and friends, 2 generations who had learned that it's never too late to rebuild burned bridges and build relationships based on mutual respect. The next day, Margaret arrived at work and found a surprise, an envelope on her desk in the small office she now occupied as a partner at the company. Inside, there was a photo of the 3 of them, her, Harrison and Arthur, taken during the company's reunion meeting. On the back, a handwritten message from Arthur. "For Margaret, who reminded us that family isn't about blood, it's about choice. Thank you for choosing to believe in us when we had given up on ourselves." Margaret smiled, tucked the photo into her wallet, and got ready for another day of work. A job that was no longer just about cleaning or management, but about keeping alive the flame of honesty and mutual care in a family that had learned the value of those virtues in the hardest way possible. At 9 o'clock, as had become routine, Harrison and Arthur arrived at the office together. The first meeting of the day would be about a new expansion project that combined the company's tradition with innovative technologies. "Good morning, partner," Harrison greeted Margaret with a smile. "Good morning, partners," she replied, using the term that had become natural among them. And so began another day in the life of the Sterling family, a family that had learned that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as the greatest crises, and that an observant cleaning lady can hold the key to solving problems that neither psychologists nor lawyers could crack. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of this touching story about courage and justice. Do you believe Margaret made the right decision in confronting Harrison? Share your honest opinion about this family transformation in the comments. If this story stirred any emotion in you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other thrilling narratives.